The booth smelled like recycled air and old coffee, which was the most human thing about the Meridian Transit hub. Everything else was alien. The concourse outside hummed with bodies from 40 systems, the towering rust-red Kelvari with their triple-jointed arms, the bioluminescent Shy who drifted in loose clusters and glowed faint gold when they spoke, the stooped and deliberate Horeth merchants who never seemed to blink. Music played from somewhere in the food court, something with a bass frequency I felt more in my chest than heard with my ears. Somewhere behind me, a public terminal announced arrivals in 14 languages, none of them English. I sat on a stool behind a folding table. On the table, a laminated placard slightly crooked that read, Human Escort Services, Licensed Transit Guide. Reasonable rates, discreet, available immediately. And below that, in smaller text, my name. Cale Morrow, Guide Certification Grade 3. Grade 3, the lowest the Transit Authority issued before they stopped bothering to certify you at all. I'd had a Grade 1 once, which meant I'd been trusted with diplomatic delegations, heads of state, corporate executives who paid more per hour than I used to make in a month. Grade 1 meant a black uniform, a private communication line, and an office on the upper concourse with real windows overlooking the docking berths. Grade 3 meant a folding table in the transit hub's lower level, between a currency exchange kiosk and a vendor selling fried something on sticks. I ate one of those fried somethings for dinner most nights. They weren't bad once you stopped asking what they were made of. The demotion had been 18 months ago. The official reason was conduct unbecoming a licensed escort, a phrase that covered a lot of territory and explained very little. The unofficial reason was that I had told the truth at the wrong moment to the wrong man, and that man had been connected to the right people, and the right people had decided my career was an acceptable casualty. Standard story. The galaxy was full of them. So here I sat. It was deep in the transit hub's third shift when she walked in. I noticed her first because the crowd noticed her. Bodies didn't part for her, they stopped. Subtly, the way people try not to stare and can't quite manage it. She was tall, taller than most of the humans in the corridor by a full head, and her skin was a pale, iridescent silver white that caught the concourse lighting and threw it back in faint blues and violets. Her hair was the color of deep water, a dark midnight blue that fell over one shoulder in a thick braid threaded with something that glinted. Her ears came to long, elegant points. Her eyes, when they swept the lower concourse with that particular expression I would come to know well, the expression of someone surveying a room and finding it beneath them, were a pale luminous amber gold, like sunlight through amber glass. She wore traveling clothes, but even traveling clothes on her had been made by someone who understood that every garment on this woman was a statement. Deep charcoal, simple cut, the hem edged in embroidered silver that caught the light. At her collar, a pin that I didn't recognize at the time, a stylized star inside a crescent, worked in white metal. Behind her, two women, clearly attendants. Both Velhari, both tall and silver-skinned, both watching the room with the alert calm of people trained to notice threats before they materialized. She stopped in front of the row of escort service booths. There were 6 of us down here tonight. The top of the row was occupied by Premier Galactic, clean, corporate, 4 staff members in matching deep blue uniforms, a hollow display showing their rates and their fleet. Next to them, Constellation Concierge. Then 3 other mid-level services. And at the end, the least advantageous position at the end of the row, closest to the currency exchange and the fried something vendor. Me. The Velhari woman walked slowly down the row. She stopped at Premier Galactic first. I watched the interaction from where I sat. She asked something. Premier Galactic's man smiled too broadly and quoted his rate, and I saw the slight flicker across her face. She said something else. He said something else. She moved on. Same thing at Constellation, same at the next 2. She reached the end of the row and stopped in front of my table. Up close she was even more striking. The iridescence in her skin was subtle in the broad corridor, but here, under the direct booth lighting, it moved, like something alive under the surface, shifting with every small motion. And her eyes, amber gold, I'd thought from a distance, but up close they were more complicated than that. There was a ring of pale green around the pupil that I hadn't expected. They were the most unusual eyes I'd ever seen on any species, which was saying something. She looked at my placard, then at me. "Grade 3, she said. Her standard was perfect. Accent I couldn't place, Velhari, I assumed, but the intonation was precise in a way that suggested she had learned from the best possible teachers. The lowest certification. "Yes," I said. "And your rate?" She glanced at the small printed card clipped to the corner of my placard. My rate was a fifth of what Premier Galactic charged. "Also the lowest," I confirmed. She studied me for a moment. There was nothing warm in that amber gold gaze yet. It was the look of someone assessing a tool, measuring its obvious inadequacy against some urgent need. "I require a transit guide to Velhari Station 7, she said. "I have a private vessel. I need someone with a valid escort license who can accompany me, manage the docking clearances, handle any contact with transit authority personnel, and be available at all hours for the duration of the passage. 3 days. I knew Velhari Station 7. I'd been there twice, under very different circumstances, but I'd been there. I knew the approach vectors, the docking authorities' protocols, the particular bureaucratic preferences of the station commander who ran clearances there. I also knew that the direct route to Velhari Station 7 passed through 2 zones where my Grade 3 license was technically sufficient but would raise eyebrows. "I can do that," I said. "The others told me their rates," she said, "and their availability. I'm available now." She looked at me again. That same measuring look, and under it, I could see it, just barely, something she was working out. Some calculation she was running. "Why are you Grade 3, she asked. It was a blunter question than I expected. I appreciated blunt questions. I'd had enough of polite ones that were really just elegant ways of knifing you. "I told a client something he didn't want to hear," I said, "and he was better connected than I was." Something shifted in her expression. Not softness, not yet, but a kind of recognition. The look of someone who had also told truths in the wrong rooms. "Your name," she said. "Kale Morrow." She did not offer hers. "When can you be ready to depart?" "I'm ready now," I said. "My bag's under the table." And that was how I came to work for someone I didn't know the name of, on a ship I'd never been aboard, headed to one of the most politically sensitive locations in the Velhari home system. Her ship was called the Ashari Asterisk. I know now that the word means Silver Dawn in Old Velhari, the formal, ceremonial register of the language that most Velhari only used in ritual contexts. At the time I just thought it was a nice name for a vessel that was, frankly, one of the most beautiful ships I'd ever walked onto. Not large. Nothing about her suggested the kind of person who compensated with size. But the construction was meticulous, the kind of care and precision that came either from extraordinary craftsmanship or extraordinary wealth, and in my experience, those two things tended to travel together. The interior was warm where most ships were cold, fitted in deep charcoal and pale silver with lighting that mimicked something close to natural daylight. There were actual plants in the common area. Small, low, something with narrow silver-green leaves that rustled faintly when I walked past. One of her attendants, the taller of the two, who had not told me her name either, showed me to a cabin and told me, with precise courtesy, that I would remain in my cabin until we departed, and that the principal would contact me via the ship's internal communication system when she required my services. "The principal," I repeated. "Yes," said the attendant, with an expression that told me the conversation was over. I went to my cabin. It was better than my room at the transit hub, which was not hard. I sat on the bunk, opened my license on my communicator and ran a standard review of Velhari Station 7's current protocols. I had good habits. Down on my luck, yes. Unprepared, no. We were underway within the hour. She called me to the forward observation lounge 2 hours into the transit. The lounge had one long curving viewport through which the stars moved in their slow drift, and she was standing in front of it with her hands clasped behind her back when I came in. She turned when she heard me. She'd changed from her travel clothes into something less severe, still dark but softer at the collar, and she'd let her hair down. It fell past her shoulders, that deep midnight blue, and it moved differently than I expected. Velhari hair, I would later learn, had a slight natural luminescence in lower light. In the dimmed lounge, her hair caught the starlight and gave it back faintly. I noticed that because it was impossible not to notice. "Sit," she said. I sat. She did not sit. She remained at the viewport for a moment, looking out, and then she turned and looked at me with an expression that suggested she was about to do something she found slightly distasteful. "I should tell you more than I have," she said. "That would be useful," I agreed. "My name is Sarava," she said. "I am traveling to Velhari Station 7 to attend a summit. The summit is political in nature. My situation at this summit is delicate." "Delicate how?" A pause. "I am the second daughter of the Velhari High House," she said, and her voice was careful with the words precise. "Not the heir. The second daughter is, in traditional Velhari structure, considered disposable is the wrong word, available. To be used in whatever arrangement is most politically useful to the High House." "A marriage arrangement," I said. "Potentially," she said it flatly. "There are 3 delegations at this summit. One of them, the Korathi delegation, led by their young emperor, is there in part to discuss exactly that. My presence is required. My cooperation is expected." I thought about that. "And you hired a grade 3 human escort instead of a premier galactic team because a premier galactic team reports to its corporate management," she said, "which means it reports to whoever Premier Galactic's clients include, and Premier Galactic's clients include at least 2 of the parties at this summit who are not my family." She met my eyes. "A grade 3 human with a folding table at the bottom of the concourse reports to no one." It was the most flattering thing anyone had said to me in 18 months. "You needed someone disposable," I said. "I needed someone without existing allegiances." She corrected the word without drama. "Someone who could not be leveraged." I thought about the currency exchange booth next to my table, the fried something vendor, the folding table with the crooked placard, the grade 3 license that was, from a certain angle, a monument to the fact that I was beyond the point where being leveraged was relevant. "All right," I said. "What do you need from me at the summit?" "Your function is as my licensed escort," she said. "You manage clearances, communications with station authority, transit logistics. That is all that is formally required." She paused. "Informally, I may need you to remain present during certain meetings. As a witness. As a reminder," she said, "that I have made choices the others did not anticipate." I didn't fully understand that yet. I would. The second day in transit, I spent most of the morning reviewing what I could access about the Korathi Empire from public records and my own archived briefing materials from my grade 1 days. The young emperor's name was Davin Seth, 28 years old by human reckoning, which translated to roughly mid-adulthood by Korathi standards. He had come to the throne 18 months ago following his father's death. He was considered, by the accounts I found, to be ambitious, shrewd, and politically calculating, in a way that his more impulsive father had not been. He was also, the records noted, actively seeking alliances through marriage. The Velhari second daughter would not be the only woman at this summit who had been invited to the table for reasons that had nothing to do with her preferences. I made notes. I thought about clearance protocols and docking sequencing. I thought about the way Sarava had said, "My cooperation is expected," with the flat voice of someone who had been told this too many times in too many rooms. That afternoon, she came to find me instead of summoning me. I was in the common room, at the small table near the silver-leaved plants, with my notes spread out on the surface. She stopped in the doorway, looked at the notes, and came in without being invited. She sat across from me and looked at the schematic I'd pulled up of Velhari Station 7's docking facilities. "You know the station," she said. "I've been there twice, under different circumstances." "What circumstances?" "The first time I was escorting a Terran commerce delegation. The station commander then was a man named Vel Sarin, older, very formal, liked things done exactly according to protocol. The second time I was escorting a scientific team. Vel Sarin had retired. The new commander was younger, much more informal, but she had a rule about docking sequences that wasn't in any published protocol, and if you didn't know about it, you'd be waiting an extra 4 hours in the queue. Sarava was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen on her yet, not the measuring look she'd had at the table in the transit hub, something more attentive. "How do you know about the rule?" she asked. "I asked," I said. "Not her, one of her senior dock managers. Bought her a coffee in the station's commissary and asked her what I needed to know that wasn't in the official briefing." I shrugged. "People generally want to tell you things, if you ask the right way." "The right way being?" "As if you actually want to know." She looked at me for a moment longer than felt neutral. "You were a grade 1, she said. It wasn't a question. I glanced up. "You looked me up." "I looked up your certification history after we departed," she said, with the directness that I was beginning to understand was simply how she spoke. "Grade 1 for 6 years. Diplomatic escort senior level, state visits, Security Council transport." A pause. "And then 18 months ago, grade 3. "Conduct unbecoming," I said. "It's in the record." "What did you tell him?" she said. "The client." I looked at her. The amber gold eyes with the pale green ring around the pupil were steady on mine. "I was escorting a delegation negotiating a trade agreement," I said. "Standard post. The lead negotiator, my client, was falsifying parts of his documentation, misrepresenting what his government had authorized him to agree to. I was present at the sessions. I saw it." I paused. "At the end of the second day, I told him what I'd observed and suggested he correct the record. And he told his superiors I had breached client confidentiality by sharing information from private sessions with the opposing delegation. I kept my voice even, which I hadn't done, but the story was cleaner than the truth, and he was a senior commerce minister, and I was a transit guide." Sarava was quiet for a moment. "You lost your grade for telling the truth," she said. "I lost my grade for telling the truth to someone who needed it to stay buried," I said. "There's a difference." She looked down at the schematic on the table. Then, in a voice that was somewhat quieter than her usual register, "In Velhari court, the phrase for what you did is *Velshari*. It means, roughly, to speak cleanly in a room full of smoke. It is not a compliment in most contexts." "What context is it a compliment in?" She looked up at me. Something in her expression that I couldn't name yet, the first edge of something warmer than appraisal. "The ones that matter," she said. "We arrived at Velhari Station 7 on the morning of the third day. The docking sequence went exactly as I expected, which is to say, I knew about the unwritten protocol, I front-loaded the paperwork in the right order, and we were in our berth 40 minutes ahead of the next fastest arrival in the diplomatic queue. The dock manager gave me a look when she processed our clearance that said she recognized someone who'd done their homework. The station itself was a different experience. Velhari Station 7 was, among other things, the traditional site for High House summits when the High House wanted neutral ground, not their home world, not any of the colony worlds, but a place that was functionally Velhari without being politically anyone's territory. The station was old. The architecture said it clearly, carved stone panels brought up from the homeworld and fitted into the station's walls, the kind of expense that made sense only if the stone itself meant something. Long corridors with high vaulted ceilings, and that particular Velhari preference for indirect lighting that made every room feel lit from slightly the wrong direction, in a way that your eye couldn't quite track. We were met at the berth by a station official and two members of what I assumed was the High House's security detail. They were armed and perfectly polite in the way that armed and perfectly polite people are when they have opinions they're keeping behind their teeth. The official greeted Sarava with the appropriate forms. He acknowledged me with a look that lasted perhaps 2 seconds and communicated, in those 2 seconds, an entire paragraph of doubt about my presence. "Your escort," he said to Sarava. "My escort," she agreed. "A licensed human transit guide." He said this without inflection in the same way a person might say a wooden spoon, not rude, simply descriptive of something they found inexplicably out of context. "Grade 3, I said helpfully. His look lasted another beat. Sarava said nothing. She began walking toward the station interior, and I fell into step behind her, the correct position for an escort, and the official had to decide whether to make more of it or let it go. He let it go. The summit had been underway for a day before our arrival. There were 3 main parties. The Velhari High House delegation, headed by Sarava's older sister. Her name was Velhari Custom, first daughter, unambiguously the heir and clearly aware of it. The Korathi Emperor's party, and a smaller third delegation from a merchant confederation whose role I gathered was primarily financial, and who seemed to be there to facilitate rather than negotiate. Sarava's place at this summit was, as she'd said, delicate. I understood it better once I saw the room. Sarava's sister looked at her when we entered the first formal gathering, a reception, the kind of event that was functionally a preliminary negotiation disguised as social pleasantness, with the expression of someone who had expected to manage a situation and was now processing an unexpected variable. She did not say anything about me directly. The rules of these rooms didn't allow for that. But her eyes moved from Sarava to me and back once, and something in her face settled into a kind of watchful patience. The Korathi delegation I spotted quickly. They had a distinct aesthetic, deep red and black, geometric armor worn ceremonially rather than functionally, and the Emperor's personal guard arranged with a precision that served as its own statement. Emperor Davin Seth was easy to identify. Young, as the records had said, with the particular self-possession of someone who had come to power before they'd had time to develop doubt about it. He moved through the room like someone who expected it to organize itself around him. He noticed Sarava within minutes of our arrival. I watched him notice her, watched him cross the room on a course that looked casual and was not, watched him angle toward where she was standing at the edge of the gathering, holding a glass of something pale and fizzing that she was not drinking. I stayed close. My role was escort, which meant I stayed close. Davin Seth stopped in front of Sarava. He gave me a glance, brief, dismissive, the glance of someone categorizing a piece of furniture, and then turned his full attention to her. What followed was, on the surface, an entirely appropriate exchange of formal pleasantries. He spoke standard well, with a more pronounced accent than Sarava's. The Korathi were less immersed in galactic commerce and showed it. He asked about her journey. She answered with appropriate brevity. He expressed pleasure at her attendance at the summit. Under the surface, it was something else. There was a quality to his attention, focused, proprietary, the attention of someone who had already made a decision and was now simply performing the courtesy of the consultation. He spoke to her as if the outcome of this week was already established, as if she were a thing already arranged. Her responses were composed. She was very good at composed. but I was standing close enough to see the slight tension in her hands where they held her glass, and I was starting to understand that composed was what she did in rooms where she had no other options. I did something then that was arguably outside my formal role. I stepped forward one step slightly so that I was beside her rather than behind her. In escort protocol, the position behind is neutral. The position beside is advisory. It indicates that the escort has relevant information to offer. Davin Seth looked at me. I looked back at him. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. The movement had done what movements do. It had changed the geometry of the moment. Sarava was no longer standing alone at the edge of the gathering, receiving his attention without recourse. She was standing beside her escort, who had moved to stand with her. Something shifted in Davin Seth's eyes, a recalibration. He was smart enough to read rooms, and the room had just changed. He excused himself eventually, with perfectly correct forms. Sarava said nothing to me until we were out of the immediate gathering space and in a quieter corridor. Then she said, "You moved." "Yes." That was not a transit logistics issue. "No," I agreed. She looked at me for a moment. "The Korathi read escort positioning as a formal social signal," she said. "Side position means the escorted party has invoked advisor status. It carries weight. In formal settings." "I know," I said. She continued looking at me. "You know Korathi protocol," she said. "I know 23 systems formal social protocols," I said. "Grade 1 required it." She was quiet for a beat. "Then, you did that deliberately." "You were holding your glass so tightly the fizzing had stopped," I said. "I noticed." Something in her expression shifted, fractured, very slightly, like light hitting the edge of something and refracting. She looked away from me, down the corridor, at nothing in particular. "Thank you," she said, quietly, as if it cost something. The summit's primary formal session was scheduled for the morning of the second day. All delegations, the full table, everything on record. That was the session where things changed. I was seated against the wall in the escort and attendance section, the formal area for the non-principals in the room. Sarava's attendants were beside me. Across the table, I could see the Korathi delegation support staff arranged in the same section. Various other attendants and advisors. We were the furniture of the room. The session began with procedural exchanges. Then the formal proposals started moving across the table. The Korathi proposal came third. It was delivered by one of Davin Seth's senior advisors in formal language that was, when you unpacked it, a marriage arrangement with the scaffolding of a trade treaty built around it. Sarava's hand would open the Velhari shipping lanes to Korathi vessels. The Velhari High House would gain access to Korathi mineral processing technology. The mechanism that would secure the arrangement was a personal bond between the Korathi emperor and the second daughter of the High House. Sarava's sister, at the head of the table, received this proposal with the expression of someone who had been expecting it and had decided in advance what to do with it. She looked at Sarava. That look was the question. The look said, "This is what was arranged. This is what you are here for. We have discussed this." Sarava's face was composed in the way that I now understood was her armor. And then someone from the Korathi side made an error. It was the same senior advisor who had delivered the proposal. He looked down the table at me, at the attendance section, at the human in a grade 3 transit guide's jacket, and then he said to the room, in the tone of someone noting a small absurdity, "I understand the second daughter arrived with a human escort of grade 3 certification. One imagines the Velhari High House can afford something more appropriate for a formal diplomatic setting." It was not a devastating comment. It was not meant to be. It was the kind of comment that serves a specific function in rooms like this one. It was meant to establish, without saying it directly, that Sarava's judgment was unreliable, that her choices were strange, that she was someone to be managed rather than negotiated with. He looked at me when he said it briefly, in the way you look at evidence for a point. I looked back at him. And Davin Seth, who was smart, who read rooms, looked at me as well, with something that was no longer dismissal. The room was quiet. Sarava's sister was beginning to respond to the advisor's comment with a form of diplomatic agreement dressed in social grace, and Sarava's hands were flat on the table in front of her, and I was furniture, and I was not supposed to speak. But I had been furniture before. I had watched things from against walls before, and I knew that sometimes the only thing standing between a person and a room full of decisions being made about them was someone moving from the wall to the table. I stood up. Every head in the room turned. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, in Korathi formal register, which I had learned in my grade 1 years because the Korathi were exacting about their own forms and dismissive of those who didn't use them. Speaking their formal register in their own diplomatic session was not a minor thing. The advisor who had made the comment about my grade visibly recalibrated. I addressed the table, not the advisor, the table. "My name is Kale Morrow," I said, "formerly Senior Grade 1 Escort, Terran Diplomatic Services. My current certification grade is the result of a dispute over client conduct in the Arvin trade negotiations 18 months ago, the full record of which is available from the Meridian Transit Authority." I paused. I mention this because the grade of a transit guide's current certification and their professional competence are not the same thing, and the room appears to be conflating them. The advisor opened his mouth. I kept speaking calmly, not loudly, because calm is always louder than loud. In the 6 years before my current grade, I served as lead escort on 47 diplomatic missions. 14 of those involved Korathi delegations. I looked at Davin Seth. Including the Savar Summit 12 years ago, I was the escort assigned to your father's delegation. The room was very quiet. Because Davin Seth knew about the Savar Summit. He would know what had happened at the Savar Summit. He had inherited, among other things, a certain piece of territorial boundary that had been firmly and finally established at that summit, in his father's favor, because a transit guide who knew the right people had provided a critical piece of documentation to the right official at exactly the right moment. It was not, technically, within the scope of his escort duties. It was within the scope of caring whether the outcome was just. Davin Seth's father had known who had done it. He had asked at the end of the summit to meet the escort personally. I had been 24 years old and had spent the meeting trying not to show how startled I was by the formality of the old emperor's gratitude. "The boundary of Savar," Davin Seth said. Quietly, not a question, something settling in his face. "Yes," I said. Silence, the kind that has mass. Davin Seth looked at Sarava, then at me, then back at Sarava, and something in his expression had undergone a recalibration so significant I could almost see the older, faster judgment falling away, and something more careful taking its place. He rose from his chair. He was an emperor, young and ambitious and self-possessed, and he rose from his chair at his own diplomatic summit, and inclined his head toward me, not a deep bow, but a formal acknowledgement, the kind that in Korathi protocol meant I know what you are, and I see it, and he said, in formal Korathi register. "Savar vel Dethin, the man of Savar, the one who stood." I had not heard that phrase in 12 years. The advisor said nothing. Sarava's sister said nothing. The room said nothing. And Sarava, who had been sitting with her hands flat on the table and her face composed in all that careful armor, looked at me across the room, and her face, for one moment, was not composed at all. It was open, wide open, like someone seeing something they had not known was possible to see. The session recessed after that, not because anyone called for a recess. It called for one on its own, the way rooms do when the gravity of a moment needs somewhere to go. I found myself in a corridor outside the session chamber, and Sarava found me there within minutes of the recess being called. She stopped in front of me. She was not composed and was not trying to be. "The Savar Summit," she said. 20 years ago, I said. I was young. Grade 1 was newer then. "My father talked about Savar," she said, and her voice had something in it I hadn't heard before, something slightly unsteady, in the way of someone managing an emotion they hadn't prepared for. "He told the story of a human who made the boundary permanent when 3 delegations were trying to erase it." She looked at me. "He never knew the name." "He didn't ask," I said. "Your father asked. My name was in the record." "Vel Savar asterisk," she said, slowly, not translating, just naming it. "Then, you were the escort at Savar." "I was the escort at Savar." She looked at me for a long moment, a silence that was different from the silences between us before, fuller, somehow. Like something that had been in a sealed room and had just been given air. "You lost your grade for telling the truth," she said. "And before that, you held a boundary for my family when no one else would." "That's the record," I said. "And you sat against the wall," she said, softly. "In there, sat against the wall as furniture because it was your role." "Until it wasn't useful to," I said. She shook her head, not in denial, something more like wonder. The way someone shakes their head at something that has confounded their expectations so thoroughly that the physical gesture is the only response. "Kale Morrow," she said. My name in her mouth sounded different than it had the first time she'd said it at the transit hub table. "I chose you because you had no allegiances." "Yes." "I chose you because you were cheap and marginal and couldn't be leveraged." "Yes." "I chose you," she said, "because I thought you were safe to choose." I waited. "I was right," she said, "and entirely wrong, and I'm not certain how to hold both of those things at once." "The same way you hold anything complicated," I said, carefully. She looked at me, the amber gold eyes with the pale green ring, the midnight blue hair with the light caught in it, the face that had been armor for days and was, right now, none of that. "The Emperor is going to ask me," she said, "before the end of this summit, formally, and my sister has decided that my answer should be yes." "And you," I said. She was quiet. "I came to this summit," she said, "expecting to have no good choices." "Has that changed?" A long pause. The ambient sound of the station around us, distant, pressurized, the particular hum of air systems and the faint reverb of hundreds of people in a structure not designed for any of them specifically. Sarava stood in front of me in a corridor on a station her family's history was embedded in, and she looked at me with an expression I was only beginning to have words for. "Something has changed," she said. "Yes." The formal session resumed an hour later. Davin Seth's senior advisor had, in the recess, revised his approach. The Korathi delegation's body language was different, less the posture of people delivering an already settled arrangement, more the posture of people who had reconsidered the room and found it more complex than they'd measured. Davin Seth himself was different, watchful, the kind of watchful that had respect in it. The Velhari High House delegation moved through the formal proposals with more care. Sarava's sister had also, I observed, rearranged something in her own calculations. She looked at Sarava differently, still the heir looking at the spare. That relationship didn't rewrite itself in an afternoon, but something had been added to it, a slight recalibration of what her sister represented. Sarava spoke twice in the formal session. Both times in the precise, careful standard that was her public register. Both times with substance, real substance. The kind that showed she had been listening to this summit not as a person waiting for her fate to be decided, but as someone with positions of her own. The merchant delegation from the Confederation perked up on her second statement, which was about the specific terms of the shipping lane access, because she had clearly read the existing Koratha Velhari trade documentation, and had found an imbalance that everyone had politely avoided naming. Nobody had expected that, not her sister, not the Korathi delegation, not the Merchant Confederation, who exchanged a rapid series of glances that I translated correctly, as where has she been this whole time? Davin Seth listened to her with his full attention. At the end of the second day's session, as the formal proceedings closed and the room began to disperse, he crossed to where Sarava was gathering her materials. His formal guard stayed at the appropriate distance. He stopped in front of her, not with the proprietary attention of the reception the previous evening, but with something different, more considered. "Second daughter," he said. "Emperor," she replied. "I came to this summit," he said, "with certain conclusions already in place." He spoke precisely, as if he were being careful with himself. "I find that I have been less careful than I should have been." Sarava inclined her head. "The boundary of Savar," he said, "has been the legal foundation of Korathi territorial rights for 20 years. My father spoke of it as the moment that defined his reign." He looked at me briefly where I stood in the escort position, then back at her. "You brought the man of Savar as your escort." "I brought a transit guide whose table was at the cheapest end of the concourse," she said. "I thought he was uncomplicated." "He is not uncomplicated," said Davin Seth, and there was something in his voice that was, I thought, the first genuinely wry thing I'd heard from him. "As I have discovered." "As have I," said Sarava. A pause. "I have a formal proposal remaining," he said. "I will not make it in the way I had intended." He looked at her directly, without the proprietary quality of before, something more honest in it. "I will instead suggest that the Korathi Empire and the Velhari High House have interests that are better served by a genuine negotiation than by an arrangement." Sarava looked at him for a moment. "That is a significant change in position." "I am finding," he said, "that this summit is full of them." He inclined his head, the formal acknowledgement, the same one he had given me in the session, and moved away. Sarava stood still for a moment, then she looked at me. "He's going to propose a trade treaty," she said, "without the marriage requirement." "That's what it sounded like," I agreed. "Because of you," she said. "Because of what you did in there." "Because of what you did in there," I said. "You spoke, he listened. Those two things don't always connect, and when they do, it's not because of someone standing against a wall." She looked at me for a long moment. In the corridors of Velhari Station 7, with the carved stone panels and the indirect lighting and the distant sound of a summit reorganizing itself around several new realities, she looked at me. "You are not what I bought," she said quietly, "when I hired you at that table." "What did you buy?" "I thought I bought a quiet man with no allegiances." A pause. "I bought that, and also something else entirely." The summit concluded on the third day, with a framework that nobody had walked in expecting. A genuine trade negotiation between the Velhari High House and the Korathi Empire, with the personal bond arrangement struck from the table entirely, replaced by a standing diplomatic exchange that would require actual consultation rather than an arranged marriage. The Merchant Confederation left with better terms than they'd arrived hoping for. Sarava's sister looked at the concluded documents with an expression that was equal parts frustration and something that might, in different light, have been respect. She said nothing to me. But she said something to Sarava, in Velhari, in the corridor outside the final session. And I did not understand Velhari, but I had been in enough of these rooms to read tone and body language across most species, and what she said was not whatever I had expected it to be. It was shorter than that, and Sarava's response was short and steady, and when they separated, Sarava's posture was not the posture of someone who had been diminished. She found me in the dock bay as I was finalizing the departure clearances. "My sister," she said, "asked me what I intended to do about you." I looked up from the clearance forms. "What did you tell her?" "I told her," said Sarava, That I was not finished finding out. I held that for a moment. That's a complicated answer, I said. I told you, she said. I hold complicated things carefully. The clearance came through. The dock manager gave me the same look as before, the one that acknowledged I'd done the paperwork correctly, and I filed the departure sequence and began the pre-departure checks. Sarava was still standing there when I finished. Grade 3, she said. Yes. You will not be grade 3 for long, she said. After this summit, the record will be reviewed. Davin Seth has already indicated he intends to make a formal inquiry into the Arvin trade negotiation dispute. I blinked. He said that. He said it to me in the corridor after the final session, she said. He said it the way someone says something they expect to be acted on. A pause. He is the emperor. It will be acted on. I did not know what to do with that entirely. I had spent 18 months being grade 3. I had arranged myself around it, the folding table, the crooked placard, the fried something vendor, the transit hub's particular smell of recycled air and old coffee. It had become, without my fully noticing, the shape of things. Kale, said Sarava. It was the first time she had used only my first name. When we return, she said, I will be required to report to my family on this summit. There will be meetings. There will be discussions about what happened here and what should happen next. She paused. Those discussions will be complicated. Carefully complicated, I said. The edge of a smile, just the edge but real. The first real one I'd seen on her, and it was, like everything else about her, more than I'd expected. I will need an escort, she said, for those meetings. I looked at her. An escort. Someone with no existing allegiances, she said. Someone who knows 23 formal social protocols and when to move from the wall to the table. A pause. Someone who held a boundary for my family 20 years before I knew his name. Someone whose table was at the cheapest end of the concourse, I said. That too, she said. And this time the edge of the smile became a full one, brief and careful, and, in the indirect light of Velhari Station 7's dock bay, extraordinary. I thought about the folding table, the placard with asterisk grade 3 asterisk in the smaller text below my name. The 18 months of fried something, vendor, and recycled air, and the careful arrangement I had made with myself about what my life looked like now. I thought about the look on her face in the summit chamber, when the room went quiet and the emperor stood. I'm available, I said. We left Velhari Station 7 on the morning of the 4th day, in the Silver Dawn ship. Under clearances I had filed 40 minutes ahead of the queue. The stars moved in the long viewport of the observation lounge, and Sarava stood at the glass with her hands clasped behind her back the way she had on the first evening, but the shape of her stillness was different, less armored. She did not tell me to go to my cabin. I stayed. We stood at the viewport together as the station fell away behind us, and the transit back to Meridian Hub stretched out ahead. 3 days of stars, and the hum of the ship, and the silver-leaved plants in the common room that rustled when you walked past them. Tell me, she said eventually, looking at the stars, about Savar, what it was like. So I told her, about the summit, and the boundary, and her father's delegation, about the junior escort who had been 24 and quietly furious about an injustice, and had done something about it because no one else was going to, about the old Velhari emperor who had shaken my hand with a formality that had moved me more than I'd admitted to anyone. She listened without interrupting. That was something I'd noticed about her. When she listened with her whole attention. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he told that story every year on the anniversary of the summit. In the family, my father. Her voice was quiet. He said, there was a human and he stood. Vel Savar, the one who stood. He never named me, I said. He said the human would not have wanted to be named, she said. He said it was not what the human had come there for. A pause. He was right. Outside the viewport, the stars were everything. The particular unframeable abundance of deep transit space. No nearby suns. Nothing but distance and light. My mother, Sarava said, died 3 years ago. My father was diminished after that. Diminished in ways that made the court uncomfortable. She paused. The way grief diminishes the powerful always makes the court uncomfortable. It shows them that the powerful are also people. I said nothing. There was nothing to say that was better than silence. He told the story less after she died, she said. But the last time I heard it, he said, I hope that human knows what he did. She turned from the viewport to look at me. I think he did not know if you knew. I knew, I said. What I'd done, I've always known. She looked at me. The amber gold eyes, the faint luminescence in her hair from the viewport starlight. Then, she said, let me tell you what it meant. And she did, not with the formal vocabulary of a diplomatic room, but in the quiet way of someone speaking truth in a space where the smoke had finally cleared. She told me what the boundary of Savar had protected in the 40 years since it had been established, what had been built inside it, what her father had been able to give his people because of it. I listened with all my attention. Somewhere in the telling, she had turned fully from the viewport to face me. Somewhere in the listening, I had turned to face her. The ship hummed around us. The silver-leaved plants rustled faintly from the common room down the corridor. Kale, she said. Yes. I did not choose you because you were extraordinary, she said. I chose you because I thought you were nothing. I know. I was wrong, she said, and I am glad to have been wrong, and she stopped, something flickering in her face. She was not a person who lost her words easily, and the pause had weight. I find that I would like to continue being wrong about you if you are willing. I looked at her, the second daughter of the Velhari High House, the woman who held complicated things carefully and wore armor so well you could almost forget it was armor, the woman whose face had come fully open in a diplomatic chamber when an emperor bowed, and I was the reason. I think, I said, I can manage that. Outside, the stars moved. The Ashari silver dawn carried us through the dark between worlds. She reached out briefly and touched the back of my hand with 2 fingers. A Velhari gesture I would learn later was not casual. Her eyes held mine for 1 moment longer than the moment needed. Then she turned back to the stars, and I stood beside her, and the 3 days stretched out ahead of us like something just beginning. Word count, ~9 750 words, runtime at 160 WPM, minutes. Phase 2, SEO and thumbnail brief. # confirmed title. The alien princess chose the cheapest human escort, then the emperor bowed before him. # video description, YouTube. She needed a transit guide. She chose the cheapest one on the concourse. Grade 3, no allegiances, nothing to lose. She thought he was safe. She thought he was nobody. She was wrong. HFY Reddit Stories, Sci-Fi Story. Hashtags. HFY Reddit Stories, Sci-Fi Story, Alien Princess, Human Escort, Alien Romance, HFY Best Stories, Alien Girl, HFY Love Story, Underdog Human, Alien Species, Found Family, HFY, Sci-Fi Romance, Humanity Respect, Emperor Bows. # thumbnail brief. Composition, * medium 2-shot over the shoulder. The human man stands in the foreground, seen from behind /3/4 back, dark jacket, upright posture. The alien princess, Sarava, is center hero in the frame, facing slightly toward camera, lit directly. She occupies the emotional center. Her look, silver white iridescent skin, deep midnight blue hair loose over one shoulder, pale amber gold eyes wide and open, expression. Wonder that has just broken through composure. Not smiling yet, but on the edge of it. She has just seen something she didn't expect. Setting /palette, the summit chamber. Cool blue-silver lighting, formal architectural background, carved stone panels, indirect light, suggests power and gravity. Alien markers, asterisk long pointed ears, silver-white iridescent skin that catches light in blues and violets, luminous amber gold eyes, ornate silver embroidery at collar. Mood, asterisk triumphant, charged, intimate. The moment of recognition, her face open, him standing steady. Locked aesthetic line, append verbatim. Photoreal cinematic film still, 8K, sharp focus, shallow depth of field. A beautiful humanoid alien woman as the hero of the frame lit softly on her face. A human man in the foreground seen from behind. Natural filmic lighting. 16:9. Asterisk locked negative prompt, append verbatim. Negative prompt. Cartoon, comic, anime, manga, chibi flat color, cell shading, 3D render plastic look, sketch, line art, painted illustration, ugly, deformed face, asymmetric eyes, extra fingers, deformed hands, fused fingers, bad anatomy, blurry, low detail, JPEG artifacts, text, letters, watermark, logo, signature, 2 human men. Crowd of humans. # story variety tracker, update row. Field this story. Entry # next in sequence. Title: The alien princess chose the cheapest human escort. Then the emperor bowed before him. Human narrator type: civilian escort, formerly grade 1, now grade 3, disgraced by truth-telling. Alien female role: princess/second daughter. Setting: transit hub, right arrow, private ship, right arrow, alien diplomatic station. Obstacle: court prejudice, imperial marriage pressure, her own assumptions. Mood plus stream charged slow burn R, plus triumphant vindication R. Ending type: emperor bows, her court recalibrates, she claims him openly. Engine B plus C, hidden identity reveal plus misjudgment reversal. Ban tropes check, no stock lines. No explicit content, adult stream only, no mixing.